Okay, so as already mentioned, what we're going to be doing is talking about creative change making and what that is. And so this is kind of the summation, I guess, of the change maker skills that we're going to be spending time on this afternoon and then tomorrow as well. So I'm going to cover 4 key areas, and then I love to have a conversation, love to have a dialogue. Any questions, would love to explore. So the first is obviously, why do we need it? Which frankly at this point is probably pretty darn clear, but we'll talk about that just a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it relates to social innovation. So I work at the Leon Center for Social Innovation. I'm the director there. So my whole world is around exploring the power of social innovation. So we're going to talk briefly about what is this exactly, and what does this have to do with creative change making. So then I'm going to introduce something called combinatorial innovation. And I'm hopeful that this is something maybe new for some of you, but it's one of my favorite things. And it was a life-changing moment for me about 10 years ago. So we're going to talk about how to get combinatorial. And finally, practicing change making. And that's really just to set us up for the real life stories that are going to follow this. So there's a real life story session on practicing change making. And the folks that are speaking there are amazing people that actually are going to talk about the things that I'm introducing this concept to you. They're going to talk about their stories of what it really looks like in real life. Anytime you've got a question or a comment, please put it in the chat, and Andrea and Purvi, just flag me if there's something there that I need to just wave at me, and I'm happy just to keep this really informal, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so change-making skills. We've already touched them on a little bit. I'm going to just introduce the change-making skills as a whole that the other crash courses are introducing. But the first one, of course, is empathy. So let's just digest it for a moment. The ability to understand and identify with people who are different from us. So, it's that ability to kind of put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And this is so important when we're working with diverse and different kinds of people that may be so different from ourselves, and it's so hard for us to understand. So can we make the effort to, try and pop ourselves into their shoes and just get a sense of kind of what that feels like? So the second is what we call new leadership, collective action and inclusive responsibility of all working together toward a shared goal. So this idea that, yeah, we need to be, we're going to talk about it next, about the teamwork aspect of working together, but it's not the command and control, old style leadership, old power type of leadership that Rajesh and I were referencing earlier. It's the ability for all of us to actually take a leadership role. You can be the boss, but you can still be a leader regardless of who you are and what your position is. Next, collective teamwork, the third changemaker skill, the ability to build collaborations and partnerships that direct collective resources, wisdom, and skill sets toward a collective goal. And this one I love, and this is what it means to be combinatorial. So I'm giving you a hint for what's kind of coming up next, right? But it's to build partnerships that actually pool and pull together all the different strengths and resources we have. So if we add these together, that's creative change making. Okay, there are 3 parts of the puzzle. I guess it's the 3-legged stool in a sense. You can't sit on it unless you've got all 3 of the legs, right? Utilizing the 3 changemaker skills to identify potential solutions and commit action for the good of all. Yeah. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. So with that, then, before I go any further, just one more poll. If you could just pop that poll back up there again, and let's do the second one. And I just want to get a sense of which one you guys feel is kind of the most important. So is that going to come, Andrea and Purvi? Just need the second poll.
Yes, Christy, just give us a moment. Yeah.
Okay, take your time. Just want to make sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
I need that music going while we're Ah, cool. Can everybody see it? So if you scroll down to the second question, what are the most important qualities to build? Okay, so we've got 3 skills here. Which one do you think is the most important? And it could be the most important for you, right? So
Sorry, actually, we can't submit one question. We have to select both, then only can submit.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well then just put anything in the top. So, thanks. Thanks. Oh, that's good to know. Did not know that. Okay. Okay, so this is interesting. So actually, this is so interesting. So empathy's coming up on top, quite significantly on top, over 60%. So that is so interesting. So just take a note of this, because I'll be really curious. Let's get to the end of kind of this talk, and let's see if your minds change. But what I'm also struck about these is that actually sometimes for me to take on to be a change maker changes based on the other change makers that I'm working with, if that makes sense. So kind of maybe we emphasize certain skills at different times. Okay, thank you so much for that. I am going to keep moving. So I mentioned briefly, just why do we need creative change making? Okay, so we've talked about the complexity of the world and things are changing and new and old power. But actually, I kind of want us to reflect, especially for some of you that are students, back in the old days, as it were, for some of us, even 20, 25 years ago, I would say, the sectors worked in quite siloed ways. So by sector, I mean, you've got the private sector, business, right? You've got government, which is the public sector, okay? And then civil society is what we call the people sector. So kind of in the old days, traditionally, each of the sectors had quite clear roles and responsibilities. Their mandates, you can see their mandates are here, and then we worked together, but there wasn't a lot of overlap. We each had our duties, our obligations, and our mandates. But what we're seeing more and more is this. So this 21st century model, this engagement model, is actually, it's gotten fuzzy and blurry across the sectors, where instead of those kind of siloed responsibilities, we're seeing it more like this Venn diagram, where the boundaries are blurred across the sectors. So you can see we have shared interests now, shared responsibilities, and we've got to figure out how we're now going to work together to take these things forward and how to achieve the goals that we have in some of these areas, right? And so that's actually as simple and as complicated as that. It's an illustration of how the world is changing and how complex it is, and why power now and influence has to be diversified and shared more broadly so that we can work in this kind of a world. So when we look at creative change making, for me, I definitely associate it with social innovation. So I'm going to define social innovation here in just a second, but remember to keep thinking about the qualities of the 3 changemaker skills. So we've got empathy, new types of leadership, that collective action and inclusive responsibility, as well as that collective idea of collective teamwork, that direct collective resources towards something. These, to me, illustrate the power of social innovation. Okay, so maybe let's unpack social innovation first with what's innovation. So what's innovation? So just really quickly in the chat, can you guys just, there's no wrong answer per se. Tell me what innovation is to you. What is innovation? And I'm gonna give you some definitions and all to consider, but what's innovation? Let me just take a quick peek here as I'm looking. Making something that's better, a better solution, creativity, fresh ideas, creating novelty from what you have, new approaches and ideas, creation, taking a risk to do something different. These are really good. Yeah. So well, let me start with this. for me, innovation is really anything different from standard practice. It's something creative. It's something not standard that has the potential for radical change. So if it's innovation, it's radical economic change. It could be environmental change. It could be social if we're looking socially. But if we want to compare innovation from a commercial perspective, okay, you're going to be making change, but the purpose of making that change, whatever using that creative approach, is generally economic. Whereas social innovation, the purpose of looking at radical change from a social perspective is making society better. Okay, so actually it's quite straightforward and quite straightforward. So if we want an illustration of social innovation, it's talking about transformation, right? So just take a moment to kind of travel around this infographic here for a moment. Just some ideas of what components of social innovation are. Yeah. Sustainable business, changing minds to change the world, new human networks, the power of different types of networks coming together, especially now when we have the blessing, so many of us have the blessing of digital capability to connect just like we are now across countries, across town, across countries, across the world. Amazing. Yeah. So we need creative new ways, novel ideas, but also it's different types of people from very different vantage points coming together to tackle these issues together. So I almost always, people will say, okay, but I still want a definition. So I'm going to give you a couple of definitions and you can take those away. This is the Stanford Center for Social Innovation. It's one of the premier centers for social innovation in the world. I'll just let you read that. I'm not going to read it out loud. That's their definition. So that's kind of the holy grail of social innovation. And there's a definition for you. Okay. Another definition is actually, there's a guy, he's a British guy called Jeff Mulgan. He published a book last year that we had the pleasure to launch actually for Asia. It's called Social Innovation. So if you Google Jeff Mulgan Social Innovation, it's a terrific book. But his definition is quite simple: a new idea that works to meet social goals. The DESIS network, social demand. So it's driven by social demands, right? So it's demand driven. But my favorite is the one that I started with. And actually, because I use this for both social and general innovation, which is FHI 360, which is an NGO, anything different from standard practice that has the potential for radical impact, whatever kind of impact you're going for. So for me, I'm looking for social impact, social innovation. Okay, so is everybody with me? Is everybody okay? Can I just have a couple? I know I'm just talking like a heap, so it sounds more like a lecture. Thank you. You're still with me. Thank you. Okay, because I noticed earlier on there was some sleepiness factor questions or points that was put in the chat. So I don't want any snoozing off here. Okay, so no snoozing off. Next slide. In the chat, does anybody know what this is? What is this? Because now I'm shifting to getting combinatorial, my favorite thing. All right, I'm into the chat. I'm not, okay, engine of a plane, propeller, airplane engine, airplane, plane. You guys are close. Yeah, actually, I think we got one. It's not, yeah, jet engine. Okay, Amanda, that's exactly, you've got the exact wording that I have, but it is a jet engine. So Amanda, wherever you are in there, congratulations. It's a jet engine. So I love this because it's a wonderful example of combinatorial innovation. Why is that? So the jet engine was invented, I think in the 1930s or so. So it's almost 100 years old. But the components, the technology that was used to build to invent the jet engine. So you see some of it here: combustion chamber, turbine, compressor, these things. They were actually all existing technologies at the time. Okay, so these existing technologies were put together, and voila. Okay, not that simple, of course. The jet engine was invented. So what combinatorial innovation means is that different resources and assets are put together in new ways that can invent something new. And if you think about it, can you actually think about something, I don't know, even the last 50, 100 years that actually was an invention from zero, something completely new, I think you'll find it's really hard to do. Actually, almost everything that we can think of, the invention, it's actually from people coming together and pooling existing ideas or technologies in some way that then create this new thing. So that's what I love about the reason combinatorial innovation was kind of an aha moment for me was before I joined the Lean Center for Social Innovation, I was working with a partnership hub. So we were an incubation hub for multi-sector partnerships. And so we're always looking for creative ways to come together across people, public and private sectors to pool our resources to create something new. And I felt actually rather intimidated getting into this space because actually I'm not naturally creative. You know, I'm not naturally innovative. And I'm actually a normal intellect. You know, I'm not one of these geniuses running around that just has kind of got a, you know, magic, a golden touch for everything. When I learned about combinatorial innovation, it was like, this is a way for me to bring what I'm good at and to pool it with things and resources and ideas that other people are good at. And we put it together. And the more different we are, the cooler the opportunity is to create something that's quite spectacular. So for me, it was like going through a door to change making and problem solving that I don't know if I would have gone through otherwise, because I might have been too intimidated to go through. So I love combinatorial innovation. So I call it getting combinatorial, right? So it's how can we pool assets and resources in new ways? So I don't know. So if you guys are by yourselves, you might just keep yourself on mute. But I think one of the most wonderful things about getting combinatorial is actually learning how to say it. So just if everybody can say combinatorial, I want to see your lips move. Combinatorial. Can you say it? Combinatorial. Yeah, it's kind of a tongue twister. It's usually, if we were in person, I make everybody say it. So you can't get combinatorial unless you can learn how to say it first. So I think it's just the coolest thing. So basically, it allows us then to create this colorful new solution. So for me, taking a combinatorial approach, it's a way to practice creative change making. So if we think of it like that, how can we then apply it to, how can we first learn about a problem together? How can we first, so think combinatorially, that's kind of awkward. If you're working with other people, okay, how can you first learn about a problem together? Any ideas? So if you have any thoughts, stick them in the chat. I'd love to hear what you have to say. How can you first learn about a problem together? Okay, so you start talking, what is the problem, right? You build awareness about the problem. That's a good one. Anybody else? How do we learn? Think about how do we learn? And especially, how do we learn about something that you really care about with other people? Picture yourself coming together. Think about what Faye and Glenda were saying. I was just so struck at, you've got two very different organizations, but just even together, there were so many touch points and synergies across them. So observation, talking, gathering information from the news, learning from those most affected by the problem. That's really good, Rochelle. Yeah, so take a look here, having different discussions. And yeah, the discussions, sometimes just sitting in a circle and thrashing it about. It's amazing how our different vantage points and perspectives are so different. I think the other thing, as I'm looking at what you're saying here, is craft questions to ignite inclusive conversations. Actually, Kathy, I'm really glad you said that, because what I was just going to say was how important it is to think cross-generationally or intergenerationally. I think some of the best ideas I get are from people that are, you know, young enough to be my children, right? They're much younger than me. So I feel like I get reverse mentored, frankly. It's the coolest thing. But I also get mentored by people that are 80, you know? So I would encourage all of you, mix it up across generations, as well as the different, you know, if you're a business person, or you're an NGO person, or, you know, whatever you might be, a government person. It's amazing the insights that the younger and the older, with you in the middle, wherever that is, can bring together. So that's the first thing, is to think about how you learn about a problem together. Then the next is, how can you take advantage of each other's perspectives? And this is where it can be tough, because what happens if you're sitting around and you're sharing and learning about a problem and you just don't agree with somebody else? Okay, you're just like, I do not get you at all. Wonderful opportunity to think, okay, empathy, empathy, empathy. How do I put myself in their shoes for a moment? Why is it that they have this perspective? What's their life story? What's their lived experience? Where are they coming from, right? So how can you take advantage of each other's perspectives? So then the question is, well, gosh, to get moving forward, which one comes first? Do you build trusted relationships first, which actually can take quite a bit of time, when you're working or getting to know people that are not like you, okay? Or do you start with the problem first, and then figure out what you're going to do and then go out and find the people that you need to get with, your tribe, as it were, to tackle the problem? Any opinions on this? Which is first? I'm checking the chat. Aha, both go hand in hand. Any other opinions on this? So, Narendra, you are absolutely correct. There is not a right answer to this question, actually. So I have done it both ways. If I think about the teams I've been on or the partnerships I've been in and the problems that I have pursued, sometimes it starts with passionate people coming together and saying, okay, we trust each other, we like each other, we want to work together. What's our shared interest here? Let's go off and do something together because we want to work together. But I've also had it where there's the problem statement. There's an issue standing right in front of me. Maybe to my previous life, I was working on issues of water, sanitation, and hygiene around the region. So the issue was really clear. So then it's building the trusted relationships and diversity around that issue to move that forward. So the common denominator here is just intentionality, right? You just have to, you can't be, casual about it. It's just really important to be really, really intentional. And actually, I guess one other thing I would say is this, and I was thinking back on what Faye and Glenda were saying. They said you need a sustainable fight for a sustainable future. And actually, I really like that. I was really struck by that when I think about trusted relationships, and sharing resources and all of that across the room. Across the group, I was thinking of these different kinds of resources and these different things that we can pool together. But what I was struck by when they said that was when they said collective care and accountability, I actually thought some of those kinds of things need to be here as well. It's taking care of one another. And I actually hadn't thought about that. So how can some of the assets and resources, how can we actually help take care of one another in the process? So I think what's really important to remember is as we're pooling resources and assets, we tend to default to funding. If we think about the first thing we need to do something, it's almost always we need the funding to do it. But actually, once you get some of these other things together, you identify the problem and your trusted group that you want to tackle it, and do you have the capacity? What are the other things that you have that actually don't require funding? It's in kind, right? And then, generally speaking, the funding will follow. So this other incubation hub that I mentioned before, we were a startup, and the first year we were very, very lean. But the first year we calculated that we raised about $350,000 in-kind contribution, everything from our branding and our marketing to volunteers and other resources, that capacities of people, technical expertise. We actually monetized everything that was contributed, and it was a stunning amount. So you can work really creativity. And I find that people are really happy to barter and trade and swap in order to get something done. So it is that pooling of resources in new creative ways. So that's getting combinatorial. So I want to leave enough time for some questions and just conversation. So I guess to close this out, so you're going to get examples of all of this next up. So look forward to that. But again, if we think about practicing change making and creative change making, the first thing is the ability, of course, to understand and identify with others. And then we look at the inclusive responsibility toward a goal. And then you add the ability to build collective collaborations and partnerships. So collaboration, partnership gives us the opportunity for creative change making. Yeah, and that goes all together. So in a nutshell, that is why this all knits together. Okay. So the very last slide I have before I open it up is this one. And it's a classic quote. Most of you may have seen this, but it's one of the best Albert Einstein quotes of all. We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And if you surround yourself with people just like you, you're probably going to get, there's that expression of, oh, there's an expression. What's the expression? When you're all thinking the same, and that's not what you want, right? You want people that are just tossing something out so that you leave that room thinking, oh my gosh, I never thought about that before. Isn't that the most amazing thing? When you leave a conversation or a meeting or a workshop or, a moment where you've learned something more and your brain has just gotten this much wider. Best thing. So we can't solve our problems with the same thing we used when we created them. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open up the floor to talk about anything that you want. Echo chamber. Thanks, Chloe. There's something else. That's going to bug me until I think of that expression. So if anybody comes up with it, when you're all thinking the same thing, So anyway, all right. Do we have any questions? We've got time for questions. We can talk about any of the change making skills, empathy, new leadership, collective teamwork. We can talk about the challenge of kind of putting them all together. Okay. First, I'm just looking at the chat. What are the common challenges in building social innovation and how to manage them in the first place? Okay, common challenges for social innovation. To be honest with you, I think the first thing for me is actually that's something that Faye and Glenda said, and that is it starts up here. It starts with mindset shift. And that's from Aisha, is it? Yeah. It starts with mindset shift. So building awareness around the problem or the challenge that you want to tackle. And how do you start up here? So we actually do a lot of work, say, in thought leadership or campaigns or different actions that starts here instead of just actually going. We're not just necessarily going with our hands and rolling our sleeves up immediately. It's starting with what's happening up here. So focus on a change in mindset, which means you need to understand what's the current mindset. What's the prevailing wisdom? What are the attitudes and the behaviors that you feel need to shift and change? Okay, and start with that as you build your plan forward. How to manage them with that challenge. That for me, that's the biggest one. Actually, once you have a coalition of passionate and willing people, then you start to see some momentum. You build a plan. You can move forward. But actually, I find the hardest thing is starting with this up here. So that's one. There are many ways we can pool assets, resources, and ideas. How do we know which is the best combination strategy? Usually the first thing I do is it's called an asset inventory. It's basically, what do we need? It's what do we have and what do we need? So actually start with what do you need? So what are the assets? What are the resources that you need? And then what do you have? And then you identify your gaps. And so then you either go and identify, you look for people that have, can fill those holes or plug those holes, or you figure out who you can partner with. It's not necessarily that you have to have everything on your team. That's where I love the power of partnership, and you can work with others. You can work with others to, again, it's still pooling your resources, I suppose, but it's in a partnership approach as opposed to bringing that diversity onto your team itself. Okay, how do we measure the effectiveness of social innovation when it's often subjective and fuzzy? Oh, this is like the $1 million question, is how do you measure social impact? So this is actually a whole nother workshop all in itself. Who asked me this? Meta. All right, Meta. Actually, if you want to, we've got, I think there's contact. Oh, groupthink. Sorry, Aiden. Thank you very much for groupthink. Sorry, I just popped back up on the chat. That's what I was thinking in echo chamber. Okay. Fuzzy, yes. So we definitely, there's tools out there for measuring social impact. There's a lot of resources that are out there right now. We can definitely send you some resources on this. I think for me, we tend to look at using a theory of change. If you're familiar with a theory of change model, it actually, you go through a process of what's the change that you want to see? What does success look like for whatever the problem is, whatever it is you want to change? What does success look like? And how will you know? So you're starting here, you want to go here. How will you know you're there? And this theory of change process, and we'd be happy to send you resources on this or you can Google it. It's a really simple process. It's simple, but not simple in the sense, but it helps you identify where you're going, what it looks like. And then you can think about qualitative and quantitative measures, the indicators that you can put in place. But it's a $1 million question, and there's a lot of discussion around this. But there's some great resources out there. Okay, what else is here? Let's see. How, thinking of your 21st century engagement model, what more could the private sector be doing? What examples of this are you seeing? Oh my gosh. This is where actually I think we're seeing more and more, if we're seeing a mix of purpose and profit mixed together. So it's not just social enterprises, but it's actually corporates and multinationals, big companies. So you can take some examples, for example, Unilever, Nike, a lot of the Procter and Gamble, I'm trying to think, Lego, IKEA. You've got a lot of multinationals actually that are starting to, or have woven kind of strategic sustainability into their business model. So they are finding ways to not just be profit driven, but purpose driven as well. So some of you may be familiar with Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was an economist. He's passed away now. He was an economist, and in the 70s, he's quite famous for saying something to the effect of the business of business is business. So that the responsibility of business is basically to produce shareholder value, okay, shareholder return. What's happening now is that companies are looking at stakeholder return. So you've heard the term stakeholder capitalism. There's quite a bit on this. There's a great article. If somebody can, actually, Andrea or Purvi, if you Google Don Schulman, SCHULMAN, Don Schulman, PayPal. He's the PayPal CEO. There's a great interview with him in Fast Company magazine. I was just, it's not new, but I was rereading it in the last month. If you want an example of a company that's, and of a leader, a CEO that's really moving from that purely profit driven to we need to be socially responsible as a company, in addition to being profitable and providing jobs, it's a great read. So I think some other folks are putting examples in here. Wen E, thanks. Ben and Jerry's is a good example. There's a lot of companies, I think it was Kathy that put that in, companies that are definitely moving to a strategic sustainability model. And I think they send a great example. Grab, out in this part of the world, is a good example. Banyan Tree Hotels, that's homegrown hotel company, amazing sustainability programs. Okay, what else have we got here? Let's see. Sorry, I'm just going to, sorry if I skip you, apologies, and feel free to reach out to me later. Aiden, society seems to be increasingly polarized. How do you make sure you're not just preaching to the converted, but actually reaching the hard to reach people? Oh gosh, this is a really good question, and it's a really hard. Oh yes, somebody else's, Rochelle's just seconded it. Actually, if anybody else has thoughts on this, I'd love to hear your answers, because it's like really a bummer to be the only person talking here. So feel free to unmute yourself and chime in if you've got an opinion on this one. Yeah, I think my opinion on this is, okay, Virendra, I'll be right there. Thanks. So thanks so much for putting your hand up. I think it's, Let me think. And actually, Virendra, I'm going to give it to you first because you put your hand up, and let me ponder this.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Christy. My name is Virendra. So just to share on this question, I think, as you said, very interesting. My take on this is that if we try to put our energy and focus on this hard to reach people, it's going to be a lot more, and the outcome is going to be much more lesser than we expect. So my take would be to not to preach these people or not to reach, but to show by action or slow and effective changes, and not preach the people who are converted, I would say, but these are the people how the experience of these people, or the changes, how our lives are changed. So those experiences, those practical experiences, means not to tell but to show, that's, or to make them experience, that would be more effective to reach to the harder people, rather than trying wasting our efforts and this thing just to get them on board. Yeah.
As you're saying that, actually what I've just thought about is also the power of influencers. So I think you're right. You want to utilize your resources and your energy really smart. It's almost like you need a marketing strategy, in a sense, if I can use that term. But it's actually, if you can reach people that can then reach those people, so you get a domino effect. So clear messaging, really on point, clear messaging, be really, really clear on that. I think that might be one way to actually, and it could be a mapping exercise that you need to do. You're here, those hard to reach people are over there, and you've got like 5 dominoes in between, right? How do you knock the first one down? And who are those others that you might then create that chain reaction? And I think that's where you can use new power, and look at a new power approach to actually, and sometimes it's in unexpected places. I think we've seen that a lot through the pandemic. The use of platforms to reach people in different ways and different types of people, it's amazing. But I think a lot of the hard to reach people are also those that are not benefiting from, the power of tech, right? So that's another thing, is reaching. If you may be talking about people that actually are hidden, and so that's where I think finding local community-based organizations are powerful and amazing and full of resources. And one of the biggest resources they have is relationships with people right in those communities. And so it's building relationships with the intermediaries. So not trying to hop the intermediaries and try to go right into those communities or those hard to reach places where actually we don't necessarily have relationships or expertise, or may not even be the right type of person, actually the right demographic, but finding those people that can reach them and that would be trusted by them. Virendra, you were going to say something, a follow-up?
Yeah, the example you were giving, share my own example. Like I'm an educator, and I do find, like in my own work, some students very hard to, sometimes get something, a message or something to change. So instead of me trying again and again, trying to get to them, I get another student or other students to get to them. And it becomes sometimes much more easier, the students, when they approach them. And I do see changes in those hard students by doing that. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, I know we're close on time. Let me just, I'm taking a spin here. Oh, thanks, Purvi, for putting that in. Let's see here. Anything else? Let's see. I mean, there's lots here. Anything else in our last couple of minutes? Let's see. Someone is asking. Let's see. When it comes to all right, let me take up one more here. When it comes to strategic sustainability, how can players in the private sector work to ensure that they are really being socially impactful and not just greenwashing? How can the public hold them accountable for this? Actually, now that's an interesting question. I mean, because when we talk about private sector accountability, who is responsible for holding the private sector accountable? I mean, there's a lot more self-reporting going on now. A lot of corporates are aligning themselves to certain, SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. But of course, there's blue washing, greenwashing, everything. What do you guys think? That's another big question. How can who? I mean, maybe it's the public, but who else can hold them accountable? And is that the right approach? Should it be self-reporting? Is that enough? I mean, most companies now are putting out sustainability reports. Anybody have any ideas? This is a really good question. So we're actually doing some work at the Leon Center exploring the idea of purpose and profit together. Okay, so I'll just say, I don't have an answer to this one. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but if anybody, let's see here. So Chatty, I thought you were going to come up with an answer, and you're just saying that your same question is asked in the same way.
I think Aiden has his hand up.
Oh, good. Somebody's got a wonderful, thoughtful response. I'll take it. Aiden, wherever you are, I can't see you.
I don't know if it's an answer, but it's a thought about what the answer depends on. I think the answer depends on how you view the role of government ultimately. And if you take the view that the purpose of government is to take action that individuals can't take, to do things that are beyond the power of individuals or small groups, then it's the responsibility of government to hold those organizations accountable or another. If they don't do it, the only other group really is consumers, is to hurt them financially in some way, to influence them financially. Yes.
Yeah, the consumer piece. I mean, there's a lot of questions about, will consumers actually pay more for a socially, responsible product, or something that's been, because oftentimes it's more expensive, at least right now. And there's studies that consumers say, yes, I'll pay a bit more if I know that this is ethically sourced, for example. But I think we still have a long way to go in that space. So actually, that's a really, really good question. And I would love to actually host a whole nother 45 minutes with some time to think about that and unpack and explore it most. So maybe we can do that in the future. So I'm conscious, am I at close to time, Andrea and Purvi? I think I am, right?
Right. We're right on time, actually.
Okay, so everybody, so I'm so glad you joined. I hope that, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I hope that you'll join the Creative Changemaker life stories that are following, because I know them all and they're very cool people and they are amazing and they're very diverse. So they'll and some private sector. So you'll get a good perspective there. And let me take a look at the chat, and I'll follow up with some of that I think there was some requests for some information, and we'll make sure that we do that.